"Dad, you're just getting too old to manage your own money. Anyone could trick you at any time." I brought a lawyer. "Today, we're going to get this all settled, once and for all." Those were the first words I heard when I opened the door, on a morning that promised to be just as quiet as any other. Standing in front of me was my son, Michael, his arms crossed over his chest. Beside him, a man in a black suit and gleaming shoes held a thick briefcase. His face was cold as stone, his gaze a mix of pity and contempt. In that instant, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My whole life, I had only feared one thing, that when I got old, the same son I had raised would see me as a burden. And that morning, it seemed my worst fear had materialized. My name is Arthur Clark. I'm 78 years old, and I've been a widower for 3 years. I've lived my whole life in the Maplewood neighborhood, a peaceful part of Cincinnati, where everyone knows each other and nods a friendly hello. For 35 years, I was a trolley bus driver, navigating the city's busiest streets, bringing home every hard-earned dollar to support my family. I got used to waking up early, brewing a strong pot of coffee, opening an old newspaper, and smelling the flowers in the yard. Ever since Josephine, my wife, passed away, the only sounds in this house were the ticking of the clock and my own breathing. But today, my son's knock shattered that quiet. Michael walked in without an invitation, without kissing me on the cheek like he used to. He just motioned for the man with him to sit down. The man introduced himself in a monotone voice, as if he were reading the news. "I'm Mr. Owens. I'm here to help you organize your estate." I let out a choked laugh. "Estate? As if I'm rolling in it. This old house and a few savings, that's all." But they were looking around as if they were appraising every brick. Michael continued, impatience coloring his voice. "Dad, you live alone. Anyone could knock on your door and trick you into signing something. I just want you to be safe." "Safe for me or comfortable for you?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. Michael looked away, forcing a smile. The lawyer opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "It's just a formality, sir. You sign here and your son will be authorized to manage all your affairs." I took the documents. The letters were tiny, impersonal. I read every sentence, every period, slowly. Michael, standing behind my chair, was tapping his foot on the floor, exactly like he used to do as a kid when he was waiting for me to give him his allowance. When I got to the clause that said, "with the power to sell properties if deemed necessary," I held my breath. "And how do you know exactly how much money I have, Michael?" "I've been looking into it," he replied, his voice dry. "You've got about 100,000 in savings, plus the house. Altogether, about 300,000. I folded the paper and smiled. "So you've been investigating me." The silence filled the room. I picked up the pen, but before the ink touched the paper, I said slowly, "You're both in for a surprise when you find out this old man isn't as easy to fool as you think." I signed and handed them the pen. I watched the two men walk out the door. The shadow of the black car vanished down the street, leaving behind a smell of gasoline that faded in the morning sun. I went back to the table and picked up my now cold coffee cup. In an old photograph on the shelf, Josephine smiled tenderly at me. I whispered, "My dear, it looks like the challenge you always talked about has finally arrived." Before you continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments below. When the door closed, I sat there, staring at the empty space they had left. The morning light streamed in through the doorway, illuminating the document resting on the table. White paper, black letters, cold as a sentence. I poured myself more coffee. The rich aroma filled the room, but it tasted more bitter than ever. As I read every line carefully, I realized it was all a trap. Cede total power to dispose of, administer, and manage assets, accounts, real estate, and bank transactions. Every word was like a small knife, cutting away the trust I once had in my son. I closed my eyes and tried to remember Michael's face. His gaze was no longer that of the boy who sat behind me on the bicycle every morning, his mouth smiling when I gave him a piece of candy. It was the look of a stranger, a mixture of concern and ambition. I left the paper on the table, leaned back in my chair and sighed. In my mind, Josephine's voice resonated so clearly, I could almost feel her next to me. Arthur, never let anyone decide for you, not even your son. You must hold on to your dignity. I opened my eyes. On the wall, our wedding photo still hung. Josephine, dressed in white, smiled sweetly, her hand on my shoulder. She never liked fights, but she was always right. A subtle noise outside brought me back to the present. It was the neighbor's cat jumping the fence, tiptoeing into the yard as usual. I laughed. I tossed it a few crumbs of bread, and it responded with a soft meow. It had been a long time since any creature had entered my house without money being its motive. I folded the document slowly and put it in the drawer where I keep the light and water bills. Not out of fear, but because I needed time. An old man might be slow, but he's not stupid. I knew I had to prepare, not to react with anger, but with wisdom. At noon, I went out to buy bread. Mrs. Maddie, the owner of the bakery, saw me and asked, "Arthur, you look very thoughtful today. Is something wrong?" I smiled. "It's nothing, Maddie. Just signed a contract with my son this morning." She laughed. "Oh, and what contract was that?" "A contract to see if I'm still trustworthy," I replied. She didn't understand, but I offered no further explanation. Back home, I sat by the window, watching people pass by. The city was still noisy, the buses still ran their routes, but inside me, there was a heavy silence. I picked up a pen and practiced my signature on a scrap piece of paper. The handwriting was shaky, but still legible. I said softly, "I can still sign. I'm still in control." As night fell, I turned on the old radio to listen to the news. The announcer's voice sounded distant. I jotted something down in my notebook. Today, Michael started to doubt his father. Well, the father will also start to observe his son. I closed the notebook and turned off the light, leaving only the golden glow emanating from Josephine's photograph. She looked at me sweetly, as if encouraging me. "Take it easy, Arthur. An old tree still knows where its roots are." That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind whistled through the cracks in the door, bringing in the chill and the damp, earthy smell from the potted plants in the garden. I sat in the dark, watching the moonlight splash across our wedding photo on the cabinet. It had been 3 years since Josephine left, and still, I sometimes thought I heard the echo of her voice in the house. Maybe, in reality, she had never left. I picked up the photograph. In it, Josephine was smiling. Her eyes had that warm glow that only those who have known hardship possess. I remembered the mornings she would wrap me a sandwich, saying, "You have to eat breakfast. Don't just drink coffee." She was a practical woman. She always saw further than I did, and always anticipated what I didn't want to believe. I spoke in a low voice, as if she were sitting right in front of me. "Remember our Michael, my dear? Our son has grown up a lot. He dresses smartly. He talks like a successful man, but his eyes are so strange. Today, he brought a stranger. He said it was to protect me, and then he gave me papers to sign. Do you know what he said? That I'm old, that I'm easy to fool. Maybe he forgot that I drove a trolley bus in a straight line my whole life, without missing a single stop." I let out a bitter laugh, but I felt a lump in my throat. "You were right. Someday greed would test our bond. I guess that day has come. But I'm not angry with him, my love. I'm just sad. The boy who once trembled crossing the street, holding my hand, now wants to guide me at the end of my life, as if I were blind." I put the photo down and took a deep breath. In the darkness, the aroma of the afternoon's coffee still lingered. I heated more water and made a fresh cup. The sound of the boiling in the kitchen seemed to bring a little life back to the house. I sat in the wooden chair, my chapped hands wrapped around the hot mug. If you were here, you'd surely say, "Arthur, don't get worked up. Listen before you respond." But you'd also add, "And don't let anyone trample on your dignity." I remember every word. I opened the drawer and took out the document Owens had left. The desk lamp cast a weak, yellow light on the paper. I read it again, this time not to understand the content, but to observe the cold typography of those who trust that old people can't read the fine print. I took a red pen and underlined the line, "Sell properties if deemed necessary," I muttered. "Son, if deemed necessary. For whom? For your father or for your empty pocket?" Outside, a dog barked in the distance, and the wind hissed through the trees. The small house seemed to shrink, but inside me, everything felt clearer than ever. I understood that from today on, nothing would ever be the same. Michael had crossed a line, not knowing that this old father had seen it coming for a long time. I put the paper back in the locked drawer and returned to my seat. Before turning off the light, I whispered to Josephine's photo, "I promise you, my dear, I won't let anyone turn our love into a bargaining chip. I'll show him that even though I'm old, I still remember how to hold the steering wheel." The moonlight slid through the window blinds, illuminating an aged face in the mirror, tired, but with the eyes still lit. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. The sky over Maplewood was still covered in mist, and the first rays of sun filtered through the trees, casting shadows on the worn walls of the old house. I put water on to boil. I added coffee grounds and waited for the familiar perk. The heat and aroma spread through the kitchen, reminding me of Josephine. She always said, "A cup of coffee in the morning is to clear the mind, not to forget life." As I took the first sip, the landline rang. It was Michael's voice, falsely sweet. "Dad, Mr. Owens and I are going to the bank today to sort out your accounts, so you don't have to bother. You don't need to go anywhere. Just rest." I was silent for a few seconds, then replied dryly, "What time?" "At 10 in the morning." "All right, you two go. I'll be watching from afar." He didn't understand what I meant. When I hung up, my heart was beating calmly. They thought I was naive, but they forgot that after 35 years as a trolley bus driver, I knew every shortcut in this city, by heart. I was also used to watching people in the rearview mirror, seeing someone behind me without them realizing it. Around 9:30, I left the house with a newspaper and some change. I didn't go to the bank, but to Maddie's bakery, right across the street. "Arthur, you look different today." I smiled. "I just came to see a little show today, Maddie." "What show?" "A play about trust and money." She laughed, thinking I was joking, and went back to the counter. I chose a table by the window, ordered a coffee and a sweet roll. From there I could clearly see the glass door of the bank. At 10 o'clock sharp, Michael's gleaming black car appeared. The door opened and they both got out, white shirts, pristine ties, faces full of confidence. They walked in quickly, greeting the guard as if they were regular customers. I took a sip of my coffee, without taking my eyes off the scene. Time passed slowly, like the second hand on the wall clock. I read the newspaper, feigning indifference, but my ear caught every noise, even the traffic. An hour passed, then another half. When they came out, the midday sun lit up Michael's pale face. He was saying something to Owens, loudly, angrily. He was pointing at the bank with his finger, his eyes bloodshot. Owens tried to explain himself, but it was clear he was baffled too. They argued on the sidewalk, and then each went in a different direction. I managed a small smile, like a carpenter who has just finished a perfect joint. I drank the last sip of coffee, paid, and said goodbye to Maddie. "Thanks for the pastry, Maddie. The play had a good ending." "A happy ending, Arthur?" I replied in a low voice. For someone who knows how to play their part, it's always a happy ending. On the way home, the midday sun hit my face. In my head, only one thought echoed. Josephine, do you see? I haven't lost my mind yet. I just let them believe I had, so their own greed would give them away. I walked slowly, my old hat, the only thing I kept from my driving days, still in my hand. Each step was a beat of serenity, and I knew the game had only just begun. I had barely gotten home when the doorbell rang repeatedly. Without looking, I knew who it was. When I opened it, there was Michael, his shirt wrinkled, tie crooked, and his face red with anger. With no trace of the morning's courtesy, he stormed in without even saying hello. Dad, why didn't you tell me the truth about your money? His voice was tight, a mixture of disappointment and ambition. I closed the door calmly and answered slowly. The truth about what, Michael? You have much more than 100,000. I know everything now. How many years have you been hiding it from me? I stayed silent. I sat in my old wooden chair and motioned for him to sit. He remained standing, hands on his hips, scanning the room. The afternoon sun illuminated the wedding portrait, the curtain Josephine had sewn. I pointed to the chair again. Sit down, if you still want to talk like father and son. He sat down reluctantly, his voice still harsh. At the bank today, they told me you have several accounts, that you make constant transactions, that you manage everything yourself. I felt humiliated when they told me you don't need help. Why did you have to hide it from me? I just wanted to help you. I looked him straight in the eye. Help me? How? By making me sign a paper to take away my rights and then managing everything yourself? He pressed his lips together, not answering. I sighed, and my voice became slower, as if I were telling an old story. Remember when you were 25 and wanted to invest in a construction company with your friends? Michael froze, silent. You came running home, saying that opportunity would change your life, but you were short 40,000. Who sold his only car to give you the money? You. But I paid you back. Yes, 2 years later, when you already had money. But today, when all I have left is this house and some savings, you come to claim it all. You don't see anything wrong with that. Michael lowered his head, clenching his fists. I got up and walked slowly to the window. Outside, Maddie was watering the plants in front of her bakery. Roger, the butcher, was waving from his shop door. I spoke without turning around. Do you know why they respect me? Because they know. I've lived off my own sweat, not off of paperwork. I didn't get much schooling, but I understand one thing. Money doesn't measure a person's quality. I turned to look at him. My voice was low but firm. I'm not afraid of you taking my money. I'm afraid of you losing yourself. A man can lose everything, but if he loses his kindness, he has nothing left. Michael looked at me. His expression wavered between anger and shame. You don't understand. Everyone does the same thing these days. Everyone takes advantage. No, Michael. People only take advantage when their hearts are empty. Whoever has true love takes care of it. They don't snatch it away. The silence filled the room. The ticking of the clock sounded strangely loud. Finally, Michael stood up, his eyes red. You're going to regret this. You still think everyone is as good as they were in your day, but life has changed. I nodded. I'm not afraid of life changing, son. I just regret that you changed before it did. He turned and slammed the door, so hard the frame shook. I sat there, my eyes closed. In my mind, Josephine's voice echoed, "Don't be angry, Arthur. A blind man doesn't see the light until he bumps into it." I opened my eyes and looked at the door. A leaf fell, spinning in the afternoon sun. Maybe the storm was about to hit. After Michael left, the house fell back into silence. The slam of the door still echoed inside me like the clang of a sour note. I sat for a long time, listening to the tick-tock of the clock, the whisper of the wind slipping through the window, the sound of my own breathing in the vast room. They say that when children grow up, the house gets smaller. But sometimes it's people's hearts that shrink first. I got up and went out to the backyard. The cactus pots that Josephine had planted still stood tall, defying the sun and the wind. I watered them. My hand trembled, but it held steady. The water seeped into the earth, releasing a familiar, damp aroma. I smiled and said to myself, "See, my dear, your plants are still alive, but the people are wilting." While I was at it, I heard a familiar voice at the door. "Arthur, care for a fresh-baked sweet roll?" It was Maddie, holding a wax paper package that was still steaming. I opened the door and invited her in. "Thank you, Maddie. I need something sweet today." She left the bread on the table and watched me carefully. "I saw that young Michael came by this morning. He didn't look very happy. Did something happen?" I smiled slightly. "Family stuff. Sometimes kids think their parents are a safe deposit box and forget there's a heart inside too." Maddie shook her head and sighed. "You're a good man. Everyone knows it. Don't let those things get you down. The whole neighborhood loves you." Just then, the back door opened. Roger, my neighbor the butcher, came in, still holding a boning knife. "Maddie told me you were looking blue, so I brought you some fresh-cut steaks. Eat, get your strength back. If you get any thinner, I won't give you any more credit." I started to laugh. If I owed you anything, I'd have to pay you with 10 years of my life stories. The three of us sat around the old wooden table, the smell of bread, coffee, and raw meat mixed in a strange but familiar way. Roger told a story about a cow that escaped the slaughterhouse. Maddie told one about some college kids who bought bread on credit. I listened, smiling. Their laughter, echoing in the house once filled with Josephine's memories, soothed my soul. When they left, I walked them to the door. The sun was beginning to set, painting the street a golden color. Maddie waved goodbye, shouting from a distance, "If you need anything, just knock on the door. You're never alone here." I watched them disappear and went back inside, picking up Josephine's portrait. "Did you hear, my dear? They say I'm not alone. And maybe they're right. Loneliness is not having anyone to trust. But I still have honest people." I put the photo down, poured more coffee into my mug, and sat by the window to watch the dusk fall over the rooftops. A gentle breeze brought the smell of sweet bread and the distant murmur of conversations. In the midst of this noisy city, an old man like me could still find warmth, even if it was in a few words of concern or a couple of genuine smiles. And I knew the road ahead was still long, but at least today, I wasn't walking it alone. 3 days later, there was another knock on the door, but this time it wasn't Michael. It was the mailman, with a thick envelope and a red stamp from the courthouse. I signed for it, with a bad feeling in my chest. As I opened the envelope, a smell of new paper and fresh ink, the familiar smell of trouble, filled the air. I read every line. Petition for guardianship, filed by citizen Michael Clark, requesting the legal incapacitation of his father, Mr. Arthur Clark. I stopped and took a deep breath. They wanted a judge to declare me legally incompetent so they could take control of all my assets. Since Josephine died, I thought nothing could hurt me more. I was wrong. I sat down, looking around the house. Every object was tied to a memory. The wooden chair where Josephine used to sew, the curtain she made with her own hands, the photo of my son as a child on the table. I whispered, "Do you see, my dear? What you feared so much has finally happened." The first feeling wasn't anger, but a profound disappointment. How could a son take his own father to court? I got up, went out to the patio and looked at the gray sky. Sparrows were flying in small groups before scattering. I thought I heard Josephine's voice in the wind. "Don't be afraid, Arthur. If he uses the law to take your honor, you use the truth to keep it." I went inside, opened an old drawer, and pulled out a worn-out phone book. Among its yellowed pages, the number for Sullivan, my old friend, was still there. We hadn't seen each other in over 30 years. Back then, he was the lawyer for the drivers' union and helped me when I had a work accident. An upright man who despised falsehood. I dialed the number. The voice on the other end was deep and slow, retaining the calm of someone who has seen many courtrooms. Sullivan speaking. Sullivan, it's me, Arthur Clarke. There was a brief silence, followed by a soft laugh. Arthur? My God, how many years? Still alive and kicking? Alive, but I just took a hit from my own son. I need you. After hearing me out, Sullivan didn't ask any more questions. He just said concisely, I'll see you this afternoon at the usual cafe, on the corner of Elm Street. 3 o'clock. I hung up feeling a great relief. When someone understands you before they even see you, fear is cut in half. I changed my shirt, combed my hair, and put on a little of the old cologne Josephine liked so much. Before leaving, I looked at her photo and said softly, My dear, I'm not going into this fight alone this time. The walk to the bus stop was as noisy as ever. I walked slowly, with a steady step. Every noise, every face that passed reminded me of my days driving the trolley. I had taken thousands of people to their destinations. Now I was driving the last journey of my life, the journey to defend my dignity. When I reached the corner, the old cafe appeared. The sign was faded, but the aroma of roasted coffee was still intact. I smiled. A quiet confidence grew inside me. Old age wasn't the end, but the time to start protecting what was most valuable. That afternoon, I knew the real battle had begun. That afternoon, the small cafe on the corner of Elm Street smelled of freshly roasted beans. I walked in, hearing the soft jingle of the bell on the door. I immediately saw Sullivan sitting in our usual corner, his fedora next to a cup of black coffee. He still looked the same, taller than me, more gray hair, but with a gaze as sharp as the razor he used to cut through injustices in court. Arthur, what a sight for sore eyes, old friend, he said, a mix of joy and concern in his voice. I shook his hand, feeling as if I had recovered a lost part of my youth. We sat down. I told him everything. Michael, Owens, the power of attorney, the bank, and now the lawsuit to declare me incompetent. Sullivan listened without interrupting, nodding from time to time and taking notes in a leather-bound notebook. When I finished, he was silent for a moment, then said in his deep, firm voice, Arthur, what your son has done is not only immoral, it's also illegal. But don't let anger guide you. We will respond with reason, not with tears. I let out a bitter laugh. I don't have the strength to cry anymore, Sullivan. I just want to keep a little dignity. He put a hand on my shoulder. That's enough. Dignity is the only thing that keeps a man truly alive. We drew up a plan. Sullivan asked me to gather all the documents, deeds, bank statements, work stubs, my retirement certificate. He would prepare the countersuit. Then he looked at me intently. Do you have anyone who can testify on your behalf? Acquaintances, neighbors, people who know you're still lucid. Yes, Maddie, from the bakery, and Roger, the butcher. They know me better than my own son. Sullivan nodded, a flash of confidence in his eyes. Then we have a foundation. You're not just facing a lawsuit, Arthur. You're facing the prejudice that old people no longer have value. That sentence hit me hard. I suddenly understood that this fight was no longer just a matter between father and son. It was the fight of all overlooked elderly people, of all those who had ever been called useless. We stayed a while longer. Sullivan told me his wife had passed away the year before, leaving him alone in an empty apartment with a file of old cases. In his voice, I recognized that familiar loneliness. I realized we were two old men sitting there, each having lost a part of himself, but still trying to stand tall with memories and principles. Before we said goodbye, Sullivan said, I'll come to your house tomorrow. We'll start preparing the file. And remember, Arthur, don't let them see you're scared. In a courtroom, a look of confidence has more power than any evidence. I gripped his hand tightly. I've spent my whole life looking in the rearview mirror without crashing Sullivan. I'm not afraid of them now. As I left the cafe, the afternoon sun was setting over the familiar streets. The sound of horns, the voices of people, the calls of vendors mixed in the symphony of the old city. I walked slowly, feeling the steady beat of my heart. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like I was taking the wheel again. When I got home, I looked at Josephine's photo. The last light of day illuminated her face. I said softly, "See, my dear, I've called in the cavalry, and this time we won't let them take away what we built with our sweat." Twilight covered the house, but inside me a flame had been lit. The day of the hearing arrived sooner than I expected. That morning, I got up at dawn, made a strong pot of coffee, and stood in front of the mirror to adjust an old suit jacket. I brushed off the dust, smoothed the shoulders, fixed my tie, and looked at myself for a long time. My face had aged, but in my eyes there was still the light that Josephine had loved so much. That light of someone who knows they still have value. The courthouse downtown was as crowded as the trolley station in my driving days. I arrived early. In the hallway, other elderly people like me were waiting, holding files with trembling hands. Some were accompanied by their children. Others were alone. Suddenly, I realized that here, everyone carried a story of betrayal. Only the thing they had tried to take from them changed: money, a house, or trust. As I was thinking, Sullivan arrived. He clapped me on the shoulder and said in a firm voice, "Easy, Arthur. We didn't come here to beg. We came to remind them that justice still exists." I nodded and took a deep breath. The courtroom door opened. The air was cold, like an old brick oven. Michael was sitting on the other side, in a dark suit, his tie tight, his face tense. Next to him, Owens, with his briefcase perfectly placed, wore a smirk of self-satisfaction. When our eyes met, I saw something fleeting in his. It wasn't anger anymore, but a well-hidden fear. I simply inclined my head in greeting, without saying a word. The judge entered. A woman in her 50s, with her hair pulled back and a calm voice. She called for order. Owens began his presentation. He spoke with the fluency of someone who knows a script by heart. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Michael Clark, only wishes to protect his father. Mr. Arthur Clark, at 78, has begun to show signs of confusion and is at risk of being scammed. The family is concerned and only requests the ability to manage his assets to ensure his safety." I listened, and every word felt like a sting. The same people who once loved me now use my age as a weapon. I gripped my cane. My hands were shaking with suppressed rage. When it was our turn, Sullivan stood up. He didn't need to read any paper. He just spoke with a voice that resonated throughout the room. "Your Honor, this is not a case of protecting an elder. This is a case of stripping a lucid person of his rights. My client, Mr. Arthur Clark, has managed his assets, paid his taxes, and handled his expenses responsibly for decades. If old age is a crime, then I ask this court to find us all guilty, because we will all get there." The room fell silent. The judge looked at me and asked gently, "Mr. Clark, do you have anything to say?" I stood up, leaning on my cane. My voice was gravelly, but every word was clear. "Your Honor, I forget many things. Where I leave my glasses, yesterday's newspaper, but I have never forgotten who my son is, and I have never forgotten how to live with decency. I don't need anyone to manage my life, except myself." Michael lowered his head. Owens bit his lip. I heard Sullivan let out a sigh and whisper, "Bravo, Arthur." The judge took notes and then announced she would open a supplementary investigation. She would interview the neighbors and review my medical and health records. There was no verdict that day, but I knew the scales were beginning to tip. As I left the courtroom, I passed by Michael. He didn't dare look at me. I just said in a low voice, loud enough for both of us to hear, "You might win a lawsuit, but don't let your own heart win." Outside, the midday sun shone brighter than ever. I felt the sweat on the back of my neck, but my heart was strangely light. Sullivan smiled and clapped my shoulder. "Today, you won not just with reason, but with integrity." I looked into the distance where the birds were flying. "No, Sullivan, I'm just learning to fly again." In the days following the hearing, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed. The neighbors found out what had happened. Some sighed, others shook their heads with pity. But I felt no shame, because I knew I had done nothing wrong. The sad part wasn't being taken to court, but being publicly questioned by your own son. In the mornings, I kept my routine. Get up early, make coffee, read the old newspaper, and go out to water the plants. When the aroma of coffee spread, Maddie would often lean over the fence with a tray of sweet rolls. "Arthur, are you okay? I heard the court is going to investigate." I smiled. "I'm fine, Maddie. The plants are still growing, and so is the truth. You just have to give it time." She laughed, and her sincere smile eased my soul. That afternoon, a social worker from the court came to my house. She was a young woman with her hair pulled back, her gaze both serious and kind. "Mr. Clark, we're here to conduct an evaluation of your capabilities. It will just be a few simple questions." I invited her in and served her a glass of orange juice. "Ask away, young lady. Don't hold back." She looked around the tidy house and took notes. "Could you tell me what you do each day?" I laughed. "Easy. In the morning I make coffee, water the plants, read the paper, and then walk to Maddie's bakery. Sometimes I help her count the change. In the afternoon, I go see Roger close up his shop, and now and then, I fix his door. At night, I have some soup and reread my notes on the case." She nodded. Her gaze softened. "I see you are very lucid." "Thanks, I don't just remember. I also know who's trying to make me forget." The next day, the court staff went to interview the neighbors. I watched from behind the curtain, listening to Maddie say in a firm voice, "Arthur is the most meticulous person I know. He remembers every customer who owes him, even the money I write down wrong by mistake." "And you call a man like that senile?" When it was Roger's turn, he let out a laugh. "Senile? I even ask him to help me with the accounts from the packing house. I forget where I leave my keys, and he reminds me." The investigative team took notes quickly, nodding nonstop. When they left, I went to the door and said to Maddie and Roger, "Thank you, both." Maddie waved me off. "Don't mention it. Honest people don't need to defend themselves. We just told the truth." That night, I got a call from Sullivan. "Arthur, I just received the preliminary report. The results are very favorable. Both the court and the social workers have concluded that you are in full possession of your faculties." I was silent for a moment and then said softly, "Thank you, Sullivan. But what makes me happy isn't winning or losing, but that my neighbors still trust me." After hanging up, I sat at the table and opened the old notebook Josephine used to keep accounts. Among the yellowed pages, I wrote a new line. "Some battles don't need weapons. Just trust in witnesses to the truth." The night wind blew gently through the window. I looked at Josephine's photo and smiled. "See, my dear, the whole neighborhood is still on my side." Maybe in the smallest places, the justice that laws sometimes forget still exists. I drank the cold coffee left in the cup, feeling a slow, deep calm. In the darkness, I felt I wasn't just defending myself. I was preserving the dignity of all the overlooked elderly in this world. The afternoon after the investigative team left, the neighborhood returned to its tranquility. I sat on the porch holding the newspaper, but my eyes couldn't read a single line. The pale sunlight fell on the pots Josephine had planted. In the breeze, I thought I heard her whisper, "Arthur, people can betray, but love doesn't disappear. It just changes form." I nodded slightly. and just then I heard a small voice at the door. "Grandpa, can I come in?" It was Ethan, my grandson. He stood there, backpack on his shoulder, sweat on his forehead, and a look that was both shy and sad. I hurried to open it. "Of course, son. This house is always open for you." He came in and sat in the chair he used to climb on as a child. "My dad," he said, hesitating. "He's really angry lately, Grandpa. I heard him on the phone with someone yelling, and then he hit the table. It scared me a lot." I was silent for a moment and put my hand on his shoulder. "Your father is lost in his own fears, son. When people are afraid of losing, they're capable of anything, even losing the most valuable thing, trust." Ethan lowered his head, his voice trembling. "I don't want Dad to hate you." I smiled sadly and poured him a glass of orange juice. "Son, hate and love are sometimes only separated by a misunderstanding, but true love always finds its way back." He looked up. His eyes were shining. "Grandpa, Dad says you don't remember anything anymore, but I don't believe him. You still tell me stories. You still remember all the old streets. You're not as old as he says." I smiled, feeling my heart warm up. "Thanks, kid. Maybe I don't need a court to prove I'm lucid. Just hearing that from you is enough." We talked until the sky turned orange. I told him stories from when I drove the trolley, the crowded cars, the noise of the bells, and how I met Josephine on one of those trips. The boy laughed, asking endless questions, and I felt my soul lighten. Before he left, Ethan stood up, looked around the house, and said softly, "Grandpa, if my dad doesn't want to understand, I'll still come visit you. I promise." I hugged him, stroking his hair with my trembling hand. "Thank you, son. Just remember one thing. They can take your money, they can take your house, but no one can take away your kindness." When he left, the afternoon sun was filtering through the fence, illuminating the old house. I sat there, looking at the still warm coffee cup, and I felt a new faith born inside me. Josephine used to say, "Plant good seeds, and someday someone else will water them." Maybe that seed was sprouting in my grandson's heart. That night before sleeping, I opened my notebook and wrote a new line. If a child still believes in his grandfather, then the world hasn't completely lost hope yet. I put down the pen, turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, I slept in peace. That Sunday, I got up earlier than usual. The morning light seeped through the curtains, drawing the cracks on the wall like the veins of memory. I knew today wouldn't be just any day. On the table, the documents Sullivan had brought me were perfectly arranged. The revocation of the power of attorney, the certificate of mental health, and a new will. 3 papers, 3 gentle but definitive blows. I wanted everything to end with honor, not with fights, but with the truth. And I wanted Michael to hear it from my own lips. I stopped by Maddie's bakery and asked her to prepare a nice tray of pastries. Then I went to Roger's butcher shop and picked out some good steaks for grilling. They both looked at me curiously. "Is there a party, Arthur?" I smiled. "Just a small meal, but one that could change the future." At noon, the sun bathed the porch in a golden hue. The doorbell rang, and I knew they had arrived. Michael, impeccably dressed, came with Marisol and little Ethan. I wasn't surprised to see that Owens also accompanied them, with his usual cold air and his familiar briefcase. "Dad, you're inviting us to lunch. I didn't expect it to be so formal," Michael said, with a hint of caution in his voice. "We're family. It's been a while since we sat down together. Today we eat, and then we talk, clearly." We sat at the table. The smell of grilled steak and sweet pastries filled the room, evoking the atmosphere of meals from long ago, when Josephine was still alive. Ethan smiled and served his mother, while Marisol shot me a look as if she wanted to say something, but held back. Only Michael remained upright, his gaze as cold as a mirror. Owens, for his part, was silent, like a vulture waiting for its prey to fall. When we finished eating, I stood up. I took a large envelope from the sideboard and placed it on the table. Now, let's talk about the real reason for this meal. I opened the envelope. My voice was calm but firm. This is the document that revokes the power of attorney you made me sign a few weeks ago. As of today, you no longer have any rights over my assets. Michael's face went pale. What? You can't. I can, and I already have. Mr. Sullivan filed it this morning. Owens raised an eyebrow. Arthur, this is completely legal, counselor, and I have witnesses and a notary who confirm it. I took out the second paper and put it on the table. This is a medical certificate, signed by 3 doctors. They confirm that I am in full possession of my mental faculties, with no signs of dementia or confusion. The air became as heavy as lead. Marisol covered her mouth with her hand, and Ethan's eyes went wide. I opened the last document, the will, and read aloud and clearly. 50% of my assets will go to my grandson, Ethan, in a trust account until he turns 25. 25% to a foundation that helps abandoned elderly people. And the remaining 25% to Marisol, who has always treated me with respect. Michael jumped up, slamming the table. And what about me? I'm your only son. I looked him straight in the eye. And because you are my only son, I gave you everything. My youth, my trust, even your mother's sacrifices. But you chose to betray it all. You don't need any more of my assets, Michael. A lump formed in my throat, but I finished the sentence. I'm not punishing you. I'm just giving you back what you yourself sowed. Your own greed. The silence took over everything. Owens quickly gathered his papers, his face ashen. Marisol was crying, and Ethan ran to hug me. Grandpa, I don't want money. I just don't want you to be sad. I held him tightly and whispered, I'm not sad, son. Today I just feel a great relief. When they left, the evening light was falling on the room. I looked at the papers on the table, and I felt as if Josephine were behind me, putting a hand on my shoulder and saying softly, You did the right thing, Arthur. Justice isn't for revenge, but to remind people what dignity is. I nodded slightly. The meal was over, but a new battle had just begun. 3 days after that lunch, I received a call from Marisol. Her voice was trembling, so low I had to press the receiver to my ear. Arthur, Michael is furious. He broke things last night. He said he's going to sue again, that the will isn't valid. I'm so scared. Scared he's going to lose control. I was silent for a moment. Behind her, I heard Ethan's weak little voice. Mommy, don't cry. I felt my heart sink. Marisol, don't worry. He who does wrong reaps the consequences. You protect the boy. Don't let him witness any more of this. After that call, I knew Michael wouldn't stop. Once greed is ignited in a person, reason has nowhere to hide. I opened the closet, took out Sullivan's file, and began to prepare. That afternoon, Sullivan came to see me. He maintained his usual composure, but I saw something serious in his eyes. Arthur, Owens and Michael just filed a new lawsuit. This time, they're asking the court to declare that you weren't in your right mind when you wrote the will. They're alleging psychological coercion and the influence of senility. I smiled weakly. Don't they get tired? No, Arthur. Greed knows no fatigue, only the fear of the truth. We laid out our plan. Sullivan placed a small USB drive on the table. I asked someone to check your home security cameras. Luckily, you forgot to turn off the old system. There's a recording from the day Michael came, when he said, You're too old to manage your money. I'll take over. I looked at the USB, feeling a mixture of sadness and relief. He's sentenced himself. And there's more, Sullivan continued. We'll call Maddie, Roger, and, if possible, Marisol. I nodded. She saw it all. But I don't want to put her in the middle. We won't have to force her, Sullivan replied. Honest people step up when the time comes. That night I sat alone with my cup of coffee. Outside, the rain beat against the tin roof like the tapping of memories. I looked at Josephine's photo and said softly, "You taught me not to argue with the darkness, but to light a candle. I think it's time to do that." The next day I went to see Maddie and Roger. They didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course we'll go testify," Maddie said, wiping flour from her apron. "A man like you doesn't need anyone watching him." Roger clapped me on the back so hard I almost fell over. "Don't you worry, Arthur. I'll tell the judge you do math faster than my calculator." When I left the shop, the sun was setting. On the street, I ran into Ethan. He was holding a drawing and showed it to me. "I drew you, Grandpa, standing in the courtroom, with a bright sky behind you. You won, right?" I laughed and ruffled his hair. "Winning or losing isn't what's important, son. What's important is not bowing your head to what's wrong." That night, Sullivan and I reviewed every document, every certificate, every small piece of evidence. The lamplight illuminated our two faces, old but determined. "Tomorrow we'll file the official response," Sullivan said. "Owens has no idea I just opened the door to his own defeat." I took a sip of cold coffee and replied in a low voice. Sometimes people think they're walking towards victory, when really they're heading for their last choice. It was still raining outside, but inside me, the light was getting clearer. I knew this fight wasn't over yet, but this time I was no longer afraid. I just thought of Josephine, of Ethan, and of those who still believed that the truth, though slow, always arrives on time. The day the court reopened the case, the sky was gray and heavy. The wind flipped through the papers in my hand, as if to remind me that everything had gone too far to turn back. I arrived early, holding my old cane. Sullivan was already there. He adjusted his tie and smiled slightly. "Today, we won't need to raise our voices. We'll just let the truth speak for itself." I nodded, feeling a strange calm. The courtroom was more crowded this time. I saw many curious faces. Even some neighbors like Maddie and Roger had come to sit in the back. On the opposite bench, Michael and Owens were already in their seats. Michael avoided my gaze, but his hand was trembling slightly on his knee. Owens, on the other hand, held his head high, with the arrogance of someone who believes they can twist anything with words. When the judge, a gray-haired man with a stern look, entered, the room fell into a dead silence. Owens stood up first, opened a thick file, and recited in a monotone voice, "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Mr. Arthur Clark, due to his advanced age, suffered from psychological influence that incapacitated him from drafting a new will. My client, Mr. Michael, only wishes to protect his father from erroneous decisions that could damage the family estate." Every time he pronounced the word protect, I felt as if a knife were twisting in my chest. Sullivan remained silent, waiting for him to finish. Then he rose slowly, with no papers in his hand. He just opened his small briefcase and placed the USB drive on the table. "Your Honor, I don't need big speeches. I've just brought the most honest voice in this case." The court officer turned on the device. The entire room held its breath. Michael's voice, cold and clear, echoed through the speakers. "Dad, you're just getting too old to manage your money. I'll take over. Sign so everything will be easier." Then my own voice, hoarse but serene, "You're both in for a surprise when you find out this old man isn't as easy to fool as you think." When the recording finished, the silence was so thick you could hear a pin drop. Michael had his head buried between his shoulders. Owens was pale. The judge asked calmly, "Mr. Michael Clark, do you deny that the voice in that recording is yours?" Michael didn't answer. He just nodded slightly, admitting it. Sullivan took a step forward. "That's not all, Your Honor. We have two more witnesses." The door opened and Maddie walked in, still in her flour-stained apron, her face calm. "I'm Maddie, owner of the bakery across from Mr. Arthur's house. He's not senile at all." Every morning he helps me with the accounts, remembers every bill. And you call a man like that incompetent? Then Roger with his booming voice. I've been his neighbor for 20 years. He remembers my wedding day, the day my son was born. If that's being senile, then the whole neighborhood needs an exam. A soft laugh rippled through the room, easing the tension. The judge took notes carefully and looked up. I've heard enough. Minutes later, he read his conclusion. His voice was clear, and every word sounded like a bell of liberation. There is no evidence whatsoever to prove that Mr. Arthur Clark suffers from incapacity. On the contrary, the evidence suggests an attempt at coercion and manipulation to appropriate his assets. The case is dismissed. This file will be archived to review the conduct of the plaintiff. I stood motionless, gripping my cane, my heart pounding. Michael kept his head down, pale as a ghost. Owens was hastily gathering his papers, not daring to look at anyone. Sullivan leaned in and whispered, "You've won, Arthur. Not just in the eyes of the law, but in everyone's heart." I nodded, but tears were already streaming down my cheeks without me realizing it. As I left the courthouse, the midday sun was beating down on the asphalt, dazzling. Maddie waved at me. Roger gave me a clap on the shoulder, and Ethan, I don't know who brought him, ran to hug me, saying innocently, "Grandpa, you won." I bent down and hugged him tightly. "No, son. I just got back what they almost stole from me. Dignity." In the midst of the city's hustle and bustle, I heard the serene beat of my own heart. "Josephine, I'm sure you're smiling too." In the end, justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand still and shine. After the trial, I thought it was all over, but Sullivan didn't. He told me as we sat in the old cafe again, "Arthur, you've won. That's true. But the real victory is making sure they can't try again. Don't let the door we closed today be reopened tomorrow." I knew he was right. Michael wasn't one to accept defeat. When greed takes hold, it's not extinguished by a simple verdict. I looked out at the street, where the traffic was still flowing, and I remembered Josephine saying, "It only takes one careless moment for someone to steal your peace." The next day I went to Sullivan's office. On his desk was a thick file with a dark blue cover and a printed title, Constitution of the Clark Family Trust. I didn't quite understand, so he explained, "This is the best way to protect everything you've built. We'll create a trust that will manage your assets in your name, but with strict rules about inheritance. No one, not even Michael, can touch anything if they don't meet certain moral conditions." I frowned. "Moral? What does that mean, Sullivan?" He smiled and handed me a paper. "This clause is called the Dignity Clause. The heir must demonstrate that they have cared for, visited, and respected you while you live. If there is any act of deceit, coercion, or disrespect, they will be excluded from the entire inheritance." I read, and every line was engraved in my memory. Being a son doesn't give you the right to inherit, only to love. I let out a sad laugh. If Josephine were alive, she'd say I should have done this a long time ago. For 2 days, Sullivan, his partner Ms. Ramirez, and I went over every detail. The name of the trust, the assets, the exclusion clauses, the list of supervisors. I didn't feel tired. I just felt like I was building the last wall to protect what was left of my life. The afternoon of the official signing, Sullivan handed me the pen. "Are you sure, Arthur? Once signed, this can't be changed." I looked out the window. The sun was reflecting on the yellow wall, and through the glass, I saw my own face, old but with a renewed clarity. "I've lived long enough to know there are things you can't trust to anyone, not even your own children." I signed. The sound of the pen on the paper was almost imperceptible, but for me, it was the deadbolt locking the door to the past. Sullivan collected the documents and said in a firm voice, "From now on, no one can touch what you have built. You are the only one with the key." I stood up and shook his hand. "Thank you, Sullivan. You haven't just helped me protect my assets, but also the memories of a lifetime." That night, when I got home, I put a copy of the file in the wooden drawer where Josephine used to keep her letters. I poured myself a coffee and sat in silence in front of her photo. "My dear, I've just signed the last thing, not out of spite for Michael, but so he learns a lesson. A father can be old and weak, but not foolish, and they can't take away his dignity." The night wind slipped through the curtains, caressing my cheek like Josephine's hand used to. I closed my eyes and felt an unusual peace. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the future. I knew I had built the strongest fortress, not with bricks, but with justice and self-respect. A week after finalizing the trust paperwork, I received the first piece of news. Owens had been summoned by the Bar Association. They discovered he had participated in several cases of fraudulent advice to help relatives dispossess elderly people of their assets. Sullivan called me, a touch of satisfaction in his voice. "Arthur, the game is over. Owens will lose his license. It's just a matter of time." I didn't respond immediately. What I felt inside wasn't joy, but a kind of sadness and pity. I just said quietly, "You can be very smart, Sullivan, but without a conscience, that intelligence becomes a dull knife that ends up wounding you." That afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch reading the newspaper, there was a knock on the door. This time it wasn't a court official or a neighbor. It was Michael. He stood there, looking very different from his arrogant self. Wrinkled shirt, sunken eyes, unshaven. His face was a mask of exhaustion and remorse. "Can I come in, Dad?" I nodded and stepped aside, saying nothing. Michael sat down, his lost gaze wandering around the old house where he had grown up. "I've lost everything, Dad. The company went bankrupt. Owens disappeared. My friends are avoiding me. I'm drowning in debt." I remained silent. He lowered his head and his voice broke. "I know you hate me, but I just want you to listen to me one last time. I didn't do it all for money. I did it out of fear. Fear of losing everything, of not being better than everyone else. Owens told me it was just signing some papers, and that was it. And I believed him. I was a fool, Dad. I watched him for a long time. In the gaze of that 48-year-old man, I suddenly saw the image of the child he once was, the one who cried inconsolably for breaking his mother's plate. I said quietly, "You weren't a fool, Michael. You just forgot that you can live without money. But if you lose your honesty, all that's left is a shadow of yourself." He looked up, his eyes red. "Can you forgive me?" I took a deep breath, gripping my cane. Part of me wanted to hug him, but another part was afraid the pain would return. "I'm not forgiving you, because you deserve it. I'm forgiving you because I don't want to carry this grudge to the end of my days. But remember, forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It's an opportunity, not a return ticket." Tears streamed from his eyes. He buried his face in his hands. The scene weighed heavily on my chest. I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Son, sometimes losing everything is the only way to learn what's truly important. You've hit rock bottom. Now the only way to go is up. But don't climb looking for money. Climb looking for yourself." Michael nodded and said hoarsely, "I'll try, Dad." "Don't try. Do it. And if you truly feel it, start by asking your mother for forgiveness, even if she's not here." He stood up, gave me a slight bow, and walked out the door. When his silhouette disappeared, I realized that I was crying too. That night, I opened the notebook Josephine had left and wrote a new line. "Forgiveness doesn't save others. It saves us from bitterness." I closed the notebook and sighed. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, carrying the distant tolling of the bells from the small church down the street. In that instant, I felt my heart lighten, as if it had been purified. I knew the battle was almost over, and that sometimes the real victory isn't found in a courtroom, but in the peace of one's heart. In the days that followed Michael's departure, the house regained its quiet rhythm. I kept waking up early, making my coffee and watering the plants in the yard. But that morning, the coffee's aroma seemed richer, the wind softer. Maybe because in my heart, for the first time in months, there was no more resentment. At noon, Marisol and Ethan came to visit. She brought a bag of bread and some fruit. The boy, a folder full of drawings. As soon as he saw me, he ran to me. "Grandpa, look what I drew for you." He opened the pages one by one. The house, the orange tree in the yard, Grandma Josephine with her kind smile, and at the end, a large drawing of me, sitting in the wooden chair, with the sun illuminating my face, and Ethan by my side. "It's you and me," he said, full of pride. "This is our house, the place no one can take from us." I smiled, feeling a lump in my throat. "It's a beautiful drawing, son. And you know what? It's the most valuable thing I've ever had." Marisol left the bread on the table and looked at me sweetly. "Arthur, thank you for forgiving Michael. He called me last night, said you were right. He's looking for a job and he was crying." I lifted my head, letting the sun light up my wrinkled face. "Crying doesn't make anyone weak, Marisol. It just shows they're starting to find their heart again." After lunch, when everyone had left, Ethan stayed to help me clean up. He gathered some scraps of paper and then asked, "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" "Of course, son. My dad did a lot of bad things, but do you still love him?" I stopped and put a hand on his shoulder. "Love, Ethan, doesn't disappear when someone makes a mistake. It just falls asleep until that person becomes worthy of waking it up." "So, can my dad wake up?" "He can, if you keep the flame lit. Sometimes the light doesn't come from the adults, but from the children who know how to love." The boy was silent for a moment, and then hugged me tightly. "I promise, I won't let our family fall apart again, Grandpa. You're the best thing this family has left, son. I didn't lose a son. I've rediscovered a new man in my grandson." I stood there, my heart at peace. That night, I prepared a fresh cup of coffee and placed it on Josephine's small memorial shelf. "See, my dear? In the end, I got the light back. Not because of justice or money, but because of love. Maybe that's the only way to truly win." The candle flame flickered, illuminating her photograph. Outside, the sky was turning a soft violet. I closed the door slowly, listening to the whisper of the night wind in the leaves. And for the first time in many years, I felt absolute peace. Since Michael came to apologize, I haven't seen him again. But sometimes Maddie tells me she's seen him pass by on the street, walking slowly, not in a hurry, with a folder under his arm as if he's looking for work. I don't feel the need to call him, nor any resentment. Forgiveness is for finding peace in oneself, not for forcing others to return. I just hope he understands that what is lost can be recovered, but trust is rebuilt over a lifetime. One morning, Ethan stopped by to visit me with a new drawing. "Grandpa, I designed the first house of my dreams." He spread the paper on the table. His eyes were shining. "It has a garden, an orange tree, and a little corner for you to read the newspaper." I started to laugh, my voice breaking. "So I have a place in your future?" "You'll always have one, Grandpa, and the house will be called Josephine's house." I was speechless, my trembling fingers tracing the pencil line. I looked at the boy and saw in him everything Josephine had always wanted: kindness, intelligence, and humility. "Son, if your grandmother were alive, she would be so proud." "I think she's listening to us, Grandpa." "Arthur, life has finally calmed down. Michael still has a lot of debts, but he's trying to start over. One can fall, but one is only truly lost when they don't dare to get up." If he still feels remorse, it means Josephine is still watching over him. In the afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood. Roger waved at me from the butcher shop. Maddie offered me bread. I realized that after so many storms, the most valuable thing I had left wasn't my assets, but the people who stayed by my side when I had nothing. As night fell, I sat down to write the last lines in the notebook I planned to leave for Ethan. The ink smudged a little, but the words were clear. A person's true wealth is not in a safe or a house, but in the way they live and the trust they leave behind. You can be poor your whole life, but if you keep your dignity, you'll be richer than anyone. I closed the notebook and placed it next to our wedding photo. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating the old frame. I whispered, "See, my dear?" In the end, I managed to keep it all. The house, the memories, and even faith in people. The night wind blew gently in the garden. The aroma of cold coffee still hung in the air. I closed my eyes and smiled. There was no more hatred, no more disputes. There was only one thing left to leave in this world, the legacy of dignity.